This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony. By the time Claude Debussy's La Mer premiered in 1903, Debussy had been at the forefront of modern music for almost 20 years. His work had been connected to both the Symbolist movement in French literature and the Impressionist movement in visual art, and in fact the word Impressionism had been applied to music specifically for Debussy, although he hated the term. Igor Stravinsky had said that he had learned all he needed to know about where music was going from Debussy's Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, and Debussy had already begun to explore what we would now call world music after hearing Giovanni's Gamelan for the first time at the Paris World Exposition in 1899. But even he sensed that La Mer was something completely new for him. It's the only one of his pieces that comes to the kind of muscular, full orchestral climax that could end a concert, and even some of his staunchest supporters were puzzled and disappointed by it. It was so unlike the sort of misty, impressionistic, unmuscular Debussy they were used to. The critic for La Liberté seemed impressed by its clarity and definition, and by what he called the rich wealth of sounds that interprets this vision of the sea with such accuracy and intensity. But then, characteristically French, he offered the backhanded compliment that it almost suggests the possibility that someday we may have an Americanized Debussy. End quote. And Puccini, who always lent a sensitive and sympathetic ear to music more radical than his own, spoke of Debussy's revolt against Debussyism. All his life, Debussy maintained a near total silence about his childhood, but he would from time to time make occasional and very affectionate references to the summers his family spent at the beaches of Cannes. He had always loved the sea, particularly its unpredictability, its ever-changing nature, a quality which is also one of the most important characteristics of his music. At one point in his childhood, his parents decided that he ought to be a sailor, but a neighbor, who had been a pupil of Chopin, discovered his musical gift and set a very different course for him. "30 years elapsed between his first lessons with that neighbor and his first sketches for La Mer. Debussy spent those years at the Paris Conservatory, which he entered at age 10. Then as an eager student of the music of Wagner and a pilgrim to Bayreuth, as a friend of contemporary poets and painters who interested him more than most of the musicians he met, as a man perpetually in difficulties with and over women, and who more than once thought of suicide, and as the composer of a growing catalog of works that attracted an attention that was not only widespread, but given their originality, remarkably respectful. In retrospect, though, it is somewhat amazing that as he was building this remarkable career, La Mer was only his 7th major orchestral score. Debussy subtitled La Mer 3 symphonic sketches for orchestra, and the sketches are From Dawn to Noon on the Sea, The Play of the Waves, and Dialogue Between the Wind and the Sea. The first sketch begins in near darkness. Gradually, objects become clear, and so does the motion in the stillness of Debussy's dawn. We hear fragments of melodies or themes separating themselves from the overall texture, as if bobbing up from the depths, until at last we get a clear sense of motion and rhythmic pattern. It's also the moment at which the piece finally arrives at some semblance of a home key, in this case, D-flat major. This cello theme is one of Debussy's most evocative, with a pattern of swell and retreat, ebb and flow echoed in the timpani and horns. It even looks like a wave on the page, and Debussy knew it. He asked his publisher to print a detail from Hokusai's famous painting of a wave on the cover of the score. Dawn finally rises, and the picture is complete. Debussy pointedly avoided calling this work a symphony, but it does have many of those characteristics, including the contrast between the outer movements and the central one. The sketch of The Play of the Waves functions as both scherzo and intermezzo, typically the two inner movements of a late 19th century symphony. In this almost but not quite a symphony, the middle movement is a lighter and even breezier interlude between the passions, storms, and awesome concentration of the first and third movements. The dialogue of the wind and the waves in the finale is often tempestuous. Recalling that storm at sea was a favorite theme of composers and visual artists throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Debussy loved to reference the musical world around him. In his Children's Corner suite, he parodied Wagner. Here, he pays tribute to his teacher, César Franck. The influence of La Mer even reached to Hollywood, inspiring scores from John Williams' Jaws to Jerry Goldsmith's work on the first Star Trek film. Americanized Debussy indeed. And even though he didn't call the work a symphony, Debussy gives a nod to formal symphonic design by tying the climax of his dialogue to the last bars of the Journey from Dawn to Noon in the first sketch. Despite the happy memories of his seaside youth, Debussy actually stayed far away from the sea during the time he was writing La Mer, preferring to be inspired by seascapes in literature and visual art. This may be one reason he was able to avoid the kind of depictions of water that had been used by composers from Mendelssohn to Wagner and which had become cliched by Debussy's time. But the power of Debussy's memory of the sea may also be the source of the musical power of La Mer, so brilliantly assured, so self-possessed, in ways that sometimes make it seem that with this work, Debussy invented the modern orchestra. This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony.